something about the synthetic content that you said that was mentioned. Actually, I know these kind of synthetic context like collage, from pictures that is kept in archives as well. And I think sometimes archivists are not even aware of these kind of things. I mean, they have things that are it's half fake, half real, and it's kept in as like photographs. Not always it's kind of a collage. It's kind of being reorganized. And I actually researched this kind of thing myself. I was also thinking about what you said about the fact that actually when we expose things on the web, it's kind of you were talking about the custody that you have, and in a way when you put things on the web, I mean everyone can even do a print screen, so it's not hierarchical, and the minute you put it on the web you lose control over it. I mean, not in the sense of copyrights, because you might have copyrights or what kind of rights, but the minute it's very disruptive in this sense as well. I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, if you can expand a bit about how do you deal with these kind of things, I would be happy. But let's collect some questions. I will translate it from the crowd. If someone wants to ask a question, I will translate for guests. Yes, Dudu.
I would like to know from both of you, what is the impact of your policy, or what are the connection with the archivist community around England and Holland? What is the impact of your work on them, and how do they accept it, or how they influenced by that? That's very important for us to know.
Okay, did you hear the question, or should I repeat it? You heard it. Okay, so take it one step at a time.
So I'll have a go on the issue of web publication. And it's absolutely right to say that when you make information available on the web, you lose a fair amount of control. Now, one of the things that we do is we archive government on the web. So we capture essentially copies of content that the government has published, and particularly during both the UK's leaving of the EU and then more recently the government response to the coronavirus pandemic, we've been trying very hard to capture as fine a record as we can of the things that the government has said and done on the web. But when you find yourself web archiving, you inevitably end up with content for one reason or another that was published that probably shouldn't have been. We navigate that by having a process of takedown. So we don't remove content from our web archive. The content is there, but we have rules for suppressing content from publication, and literally hundreds of thousands of rules for content that was once published, but now it is no longer appropriate for it to be published. And that tells us something about the kind of facility we're going to need in future. Now, this issue is very relevant for me at the moment because we're just about to make available a new service providing public access to court judgments, so decisions that the courts have made, and it's a principle of a constitutional principle for us that the decisions of the courts are open and transparent, and the court judgments are published, and we're going to be we're receiving and publishing court judgments as soon as they're handed down, making them immediately available. But of course, the courts can sometimes change their minds and issue subsequent anonymization orders. So we're actually using licensing and intellectual property rights to place some obligations on downstream users that they can only republish the currently published version of the judgment that we've made available. And if we change the version, then it's a condition of the license that they similarly have to move on and move to the newly published version that we have. And we found ourselves doing some unusual things as an archive, creating content hashes so that people can track across different formats whether they have the same version of the text or a different version of the text. And that's interesting because the public interest is publication gives you so much that it's worth dealing with the consequences that sometimes you'll publish something that subsequently needs to be adapted or changed. But we're also very clear we're going to run into situations with court judgments and with other digital records where we will need to provide access short of publication, exactly because through publishing records we lose the remedy of being able to remove from access something that potentially shouldn't have been available for inspection in the first place. We lose that remedy if the material has been published. And so we have this concept of gradating access, finding lots of different ways in which we can manage this information is published and is available for indexing by search engines. This information is published but not for indexing. This information is published and has got some special licensing conditions. This information is redacted in some way but published. This information is not published but is available for forms of non-consumptive research, so you can pose a query to the archive and get something back. Archives are going to need all of these kinds of modalities of access to be able to navigate these sorts of issues. To the question about archivists and the archivist community, then by some distance, the National Archives in the UK is the UK's largest archive, and it's packed full of archivists. So we inevitably have a big impact because we employ so many archivists, and we tend our employees tend to have a significant role as part of the profession and professional development. And we very much, not just through the traditional archival networks, but also through organizations like the Digital Preservation Coalition, we engage in community efforts to develop practices. For example, the diagram model was not just developed by archivists at the National Archives in the UK, it was developed by a group of archivists from, I think, 16 different archives. So, pooling together a variety of different kinds of expertise from different settings and different contexts is an important part of how we see ourselves developing practice.
Okay. Tom, do you want to answer that question as well? About the connection between the National Archives and the archivist community around the Netherlands?
Yeah, we've engaged in recently we've increased our engagement with the archival communities, because the National Archives are responsible to set out certain guidelines or metadata standards, for example, on a national level, that are then extended to local governments and archives as well. That happened slightly in isolation. There was always, like, via the ministry, there was contact with local authorities, with provinces, and so on. But now we've started up a knowledge platform. It's called KIA, which basically tries to organize communities around certain topics and themes, such as preservation, metadata standards, the new archival law, for example, that's coming into place, where there's very active debate. We try to actually pick up on the worries that are there, or execution problems in the execution of certain standards. So we try to engage increasingly engage in conversation and basically develop standards together with the archival field. So that's also part of that movement of getting closer to the archives, because as a National Archive, you sometimes don't really know the challenges that local archives are facing with, and we have to come up with standards. We feel a responsibility that we have to come up with standards that can be applied to all environments in the Netherlands, not just in The Hague. So yeah, we're definitely working a lot on building those communities, and of course there is like Digital Preservation Coalition as well we have a lot of professionals that are working in those coalitions as well. But the KIA platform, the knowledge platform for information and archival specialists, that's something that we host as a national archive, and some debates on there in communities around certain platforms and certain themes are closed. For example, if it's a metadata standard that's still in the making, so then we invite a large group of professionals to join that conversation and come up with the standards together that work for everyone. And others are just public, which are basically like a debating platform. And we've currently got more than I think more than 2,000 users on those platforms. That's quite big for a small country.
That's great. Any further questions from the crowd? Yes.
Difference between the original document and photograph and something like the material. And it seems that as we progress in time, virtual reality and so forth, we might lose this capability. And we heard it in the previous conferences we had as well, the Archives Association, about visiting systems. I find it very interesting. Of course, it's somewhere in the future, but maybe near future. And I'm interested to know your thoughts about this.
Okay. Okay. I'll forward a question. The lady was asking about in the virtual space that we are living today. It is harder to decide whether the record or the things that you read or you see are fake or real, and how do you deal with training archivists deciding how to manage, how to deal with these kind of materials, mostly virtual, I suppose, and digital, electronic, whether they are real, they are fake. How do you deal with these kind of materials? With these kind of questions? Yes.
So we've had a go at a few things. So obviously, provenance is so important, and the understanding that the archive has about its digital records and where those records have come from is, and being overt about the provenance of the records is really important. We've tried various kinds of for research. We tried various kinds of things like could we create hashes of so turn the content into a number that you can then verify that the content is the same over time. And we've tried that with things like video content, where knowing that we'll have to change the format of the video from the format that the video was created in to the format that we might be presenting the content in on the web now, or that we might be presenting the content in 10 years' time. So can we use deep networks for creating content hashes? The answer is yes, you can do this, but it's computationally quite expensive. And that obviously then has both an economic and an environmental impact. Similarly, we've also looked at things like using distributed ledgers or blockchains, and could we set up an archival blockchain? And again, it's like, well, yes, you can, but that's computationally and therefore economically and environmentally impactful and expensive. Does it give you enough over and above what the combination of institutional trust and good provenance and archivists who understand provenance, what that gives you. And I think a lot of these things come down to, and increasingly for me, I've come to the conclusion of, whilst we might look towards technological solutions to these problems, and we might find trying to invent a technical way of addressing these issues where that has a lot of appeal for people who are interested in technology, and I'm interested in technology, actually it's the institution and the institutional commitment that is the real solution. It's the archive as an institution, and what it is able to do that ultimately will lend trust in archival collections, the provenance that we manage, how we manage our catalogue, what we know about our records, the expertise that we have about our collection. That's what's going to really count in the long run. Turns out a big part of the digital archive's value is provided by archivists, not by technology.
I think it's humanity always proven it, that we sit behind the technology and the computers and all of that, as you sit in your home now enjoying your son. Tom, you want to add anything?
Well, no, I mean, provenance research has always been very important at the National Archives, especially in the analog domain. And in digital domain, we find that, as John said, computationally, it's actually quite challenging to take it on. We very often think in technological solutions for that. And we try to, I mean, as we work with governments, mainly with governments only, that's our legal framework. So we kind of know where information comes from. And I think that combined with the archiving by design approach that we are taking, much of the provenance worries can actually be tackled at the front of the chain. So when people put out videos on their website and so on, we've already been part of the content management system or the media management system that's employed by the specific organization. So we were already engaged in that. So we hope to tackle these problems at the front of the chain rather than introduce very expensive technological solutions at the back. So that's how we were hoping to tackle provenance issues.
Okay, thank you very much, all the three of you, Tom, Vincent, and John. We really appreciate it that you kept some time for us. Sorry for the technical problems, and I hope we meet again either virtually or even in Europe or in Israel. You're invited. Thank you very much.